Hello, UMA students. This is Heather Mazurowski. I am a UMA instructor, and I have been a UMA instructor for a little over 3.5 years, almost 4 years. I have been an English teacher for almost 27 years. So today I'm going to talk to you about credible sources. But I will take myself off video in a few seconds because I just wanted to be sure that you saw me, maybe put a face with a name, some familiarity, if you will. But today we will talk about credible sources when writing, but possibly just in general as well. So I will take myself off and I will be back at the end. Okay, so what makes a source credible? There are about 5 ideas, I guess, if you will, or criteria, maybe, that we'll talk about when we're thinking about if a source is credible. And I guess what we want to think about is a source credible is it trustworthy? Can we feel confident that the information that's been provided in the source is accurate and that we could possibly use it as guidelines to go by, depending upon what kind of a topic we are searching? Okay, so some of the criteria maybe. Who is the author? And is evidence provided? How recent is the source? What is the author's purpose? What type of source does your audience value? And then be especially careful when evaluating internet sources. And we will talk about that a little bit later. Actually, we'll talk about each one of these in the next several slides. But internet sources, being a girl who did not grow up in the digital age, I've always been a little leery of what I found on the internet. However, if you have grown up in the digital age, you have always had it available to you. But it's just a caution to remember that everything that is on the internet is not always 100% accurate. All right, now the first one. Who is the author of our source, and is there evidence provided? First and foremost, you always want to be sure that your source has an author. Now, it can't stop there, though, when we are considering credible sources. Having an author alone is certainly great, but that does not automatically make the source credible. So, second, as I have there, when evaluating for credibility, you want to investigate a little more to be sure the author is an expert or respected in the field. So I have credible sources are written by authors respected in their fields of study. So an example would be if I'm searching something in healthcare, and let's say I'm searching about hypothyroidism, and I choose that just because I was recently diagnosed with it, so I've been researching it. I'm going to want to pay attention to the author of the sources that I find. First off, is the author a doctor? And second of all, is the doctor somebody who might specialize in thyroid problems? So those are the ideas that we want to consider when we're asking who is the author? And is the author an expert or respected in the field? Now, another part of that says, is evidence provided? And at the bottom of your screen, you see it says, also responsible, credible authors will cite their sources so that you can check the accuracy of and support for what they've written. So in other words, something that you want to consider is when you're looking at a source and you find A, it has an author. B, the author is an expert in the field or respected in the field. Now you want to see, did that author cite sources, give good factual evidence for the ideas or thoughts provided? This is also very helpful if we're researching for an essay or something that we may be writing, because if our author has cited sources, then oftentimes that's also a good way for us as a writer to look at other sources and find possibly other sources that we could add to our writing. So we want to be certain, first, there's an author. Second, the author is credible, or I should say the author is an expert or respected in the field. And has this author cited his or her sources so that we can check for accuracy of what facts have been provided. Okay, how recent is the source? Typically, when you are researching, there will be a date that is on the source of when it was published. So that's what we're talking about when we're asking if the source is recent. Again, some of the things we want to consider. The choice to seek recent sources depends on your topic. If I am searching the American Civil War, my sources may be decades old, but they're still going to contain accurate information. So it's going to depend upon the source, or I'm sorry, the topic you were researching, such as I said, the American Civil War ended in roughly 1865. So my sources are going to be quite old. Not saying they have to be from the 1800s. However, they're going to be quite old for the information probably was written soon after. So, and that's okay because there's no new findings necessarily. It's, the war is over and there's not, we don't have to have new research for it. Now, if we're talking healthcare, if you're talking if you look at some of the ones I have on there, information technologies, anything to do with our digital age, those sources should be very, very recent because those worlds are changing rapidly. As new technologies are invented, as new therapies come out for treatment in the healthcare world. So it's very important that those sources should be fairly recent. So you always want to check the date on your source and see to see when it was actually published. Within your text, I believe it shares the idea that a 5-year window may be good as far as when you're dealing with maybe some areas that are not so rapidly changing, like healthcare and the digital world. So maybe, like a 5-year window could be a gauge for areas that would not be changing so rapidly. But that's a suggestion. That doesn't mean that it has to be within that realm. Now, what is the author's purpose? We may not know because we're not the author, but we want to gather information so that we can get maybe an idea of what we think the author's purpose may be. So in other words, what your slide, it says, when deciding which sources to use, you should take the purpose or point of view of the author into consideration. Is the author presenting a neutral, objective view of a topic? Or is the author advocating one specific view of a topic? Who is funding the research or writing of this source? A source written from a particular point of view may be credible However, you need to be careful that your sources don't limit your coverage of a topic to one side of a debate. So, what this is saying is, for instance, in the healthcare field, if you are researching procedures for a heart attack, and the particular author of the source that you find is the actual person who invented, so to speak, or who came upon this procedure or is funding a certain procedure, that author's point of view is going to be a little bit biased because he or she is going to be obviously geared toward the procedure he is funding, or he or she is using or inventing or found that it is the best procedure to use. So again, doesn't mean that the source is not necessarily a credible one. You just have to think about that, to take that into your own consideration and realize the source may not explain all the different views or all the different treatments that could be possible. When I taught high school English and I taught sophomores, they would write their first research paper as a sophomore in the particular school where I taught. I required them to have, when they would write their paper, that they started out with their topic, they started out with their views, but I also had them have one opposing view to theirs, because I wanted them to be sure to understand that there are many different views of different topics. And we always want to be certain that we are not limiting ourselves to one view or one side, if you will, if you're talking of a debate. So we always want to consider what the author's purpose is. Now, when we're thinking of our sources and when we're thinking of when we're writing, obviously considering our audience is very important. And that has been addressed as well in some other videos about the importance of knowing your audience. When you know your audience, then you know what you're going to be writing about, because you're going to gear your ideas toward your audience. This would also be helpful when you're considering your sources. All right, so for instance, if you are going to be writing for something that is going to be published, then you're going to obviously want to consider something that has been peer reviewed by other people in the field, because the audience that's reading that is going to check those sources. Have these been peer reviewed? You know, where are these sources? Where did they locate these sources? So if it's something that's going to be published like as an academic or a professional journal, so you're going to have an academic or professional audience, then you want to make sure that you have peer-reviewed journals as most of where you have obtained your information. If you're writing an article for your local newspaper, maybe, addressing the local people who live in your town, you may be able to use things from a Time magazine or a Newsweek, as, that something that your hometown may be familiar with, or the audience there. So if you're writing in a local newspaper, your hometown fellow neighbors are going to be your audience. If you're writing for a younger audience, you definitely want to be locating information that's on the internet, because typically I know if I'm addressing an audience younger than I am, then I know they're going to be more of a digital age. Therefore, I would definitely look for more internet sources. So not necessarily that it has to be, this particular part of the criteria could very well be to help you establish credibility as the writer, because you're using sources that are going to appeal to your audience. Okay, so now we are at this particular one, which I had said we would talk about later, as we did the others, but be especially careful when using internet sources. And I have a little graphic there that says, what do you mean all my facts are wrong? I copied everything straight off the internet. And as I shared earlier, I am not a girl of the digital age. I grew up where I still had to go to the library, check out the books, do your research in that manner. So I've always been a little skeptical of what I find on the internet. But if you are of the digital age, that's all you know. One thing to be very cautious, first of all, is never use websites where an author cannot be determined, unless the site is associated with a reputable institution, such as a respected university, a credible media outlet, government program or department, or well-known non-governmental organizations. So, the first thing you want to consider, first of all, we know that, I know many times if I think, oh, I'm not sure about that, I'll Google it. And I use Google for many things. And so, but the first thing that you want to pay attention to is when Google brings you the results for whatever you've searched, you want to pay attention to those sources and make sure if there is no author at all, then that should be a red flag that it's probably not going to be a credible source. Now, oftentimes we may find things on a CDC website that says staff as an author, and that it could be considered okay because cdc.gov has a very reputable reputation. Therefore, that particular no author listed or staff listed would be acceptable. Now, it says beware of using sites like Wikipedia, which are collaboratively developed by users, because anyone can add or change content. The validity of information on such sites may not meet the standards for academic research. So what that's saying is, for instance, it's not that everyone wants to jump on the bandwagon to say Wikipedia is horrible. It is not horrible, but you have to go into knowing that it is not going to be a site recognized for academic research. And the reason being is because anyone can add or edit to that site. There is not one particular author of that site, so it is not governed, so to speak. We don't know if what somebody added is accurate or not. So it is not considered a credible source for that reason. And you want to pay attention to that for other sources as well. Now, this information, this is my reference, and this is something that you want to keep in mind as well. This information came from the Purdue Online Writing Lab, or it is the Purdue OWL. Many of you may have heard that. It's a great, very credible source, and it has a lot of information about the APA format, citing, finding credible sources, using credible sources, how to know if it's credible. So this information that I shared with you came from this site. And I have to give credit to that site, obviously. So this is my reference for that particular site. Okay, I'm back, as I said I would at the end. A couple things on my final thoughts. The first, I'll go through my normal ones. If you have any questions, please reach out to your instructor. Obviously, we are all here to help you. You can also reach out to academic services, as I have them. Their number listed on the screen. And I have a motivational. The best way to get something done is to begin, obviously. That's just a motivational. And research is not my favorite thing. So this is, I thought, was good for me as well as maybe for you. But so sometimes I'd like to drag my feet when it comes to research, but the best way to get it done is to just begin. The second thing that I want to address is, why am I talking about credible sources? Some of you may be thinking, would I ever use this in the healthcare field? Yes, you will. Um, I think you will use it in the healthcare field, and I hope that maybe you'll consider this maybe in life in general. When we see, as we are living in such a political world right now with an election coming, that, when you see things, whether it's TV or you read, take what the information that was on that presented here and think about it. Is the information accurate? Does this person have an agenda with who wrote this? Um, but in the healthcare field, I think, for instance, my husband was just in the hospital recently, and he had to have a heart cath, and things. He had an echocardiogram, so things of that nature. And when we left the hospital, we were given a lot of research about a heart attack, about what to do, and it was from the internet, and it was not something that was handwritten by a doctor. Now, I don't know who was responsible for completing that. I don't know if maybe it was the nurse. Was it the medical administrative assistant? Was it the medical assistant? I don't know who was responsible for giving that information. I know that we were presented it with all of the discharge information. So certainly, if you are going to be the one responsible for that information, it would be very important that you're certain you're getting that information, giving to a patient, that the information is from credible sources. So those are just my thoughts on why credible sources and why it would be important to be able to recognize them and how to recognize them, how that could be important to you as a healthcare professional. And there may be other ways, certainly, that you may be having to access credible sources. I hope you found this video to be helpful, and I hope that if in fact that you use this information, whether it be in your daily life or in your career. Thanks for watching.